Halo. It's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
Damn right I am. Dear humanity, you regret being alien bastard.
Nice.
What would you have your arbiter do?
Freaking bug.
Could we possibly make any more noise? I guess so.
Well, I just happen to have a key. Oh, I know what the ladies like.
Words so easy.
Kill.
I will know all that I possess! So, you must be silenced.
Hail to the king!
What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, God King Futz. You read the title, you clicked the video, we both know why you're here. This is the Halo story so far, getting you ready for Halo Infinite's drop on December 8th. Drop a like if you like what I did today, and don't forget to subscribe for more content in the future.
Oh, I know what the ladies like.
So, our story starts a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Sorry guys, wrong script. Okay, so a long, super duper stupid long time ago. We're talking 150,000 to 10 million years ago. A super advanced ancient alien race known only as the Precursors are the acting caretakers to the entire galaxy, a job they affectionately call the Mantle of Responsibility. In their eyes, whoever holds the mantle is charged with the peace and prosperity of all life across the entire galaxy. Eventually, the Precursors decide to hand the Mantle of Responsibility over to an advancing alien race known as the Forerunners. This relationship, however, does not last forever, as the Precursors decide a new civilization coming along that is way cooler than the Forerunners, known as humanity, is more deserving of the Mantle of Responsibility than the Forerunners ever were. In fact, the Precursors decide that ancient humanity is so cool that they take the Mantle of Responsibility away from the Foreigners and give it right to the humans. Naturally, the Foreigners are kinda pissed about losing the Mantle of Responsibility and decide to wage war on the Precursors. War turns to genocide fairly quickly, however, and soon the Precursors are all but wiped from the galaxy. However, being a much more advanced species than the Foreigners, the Precursors had ways of avoiding complete annihilation. One of the Precursors decides to turn himself into a dust-like substance, preserving his existence to hopefully one day return. This fancy ancient alien space dust ends up corrupting and becomes an infectious zombie space virus known as the Flood, but we'll get to more of that soon. In the meantime, ancient humans are setting up shop just outside Foreigner territory, minding their own business and just generally being badass ancient humans. This goes on for a while until sometime before the year 107,445 BCE, when humanity runs into the space zombies for the first time and realizes shit is about to get real. After a long and hard-fought struggle, the space zombie apocalypse pushes humanity back out of their territory, forcing them to flee in the opposite direction, right into Foreigner-held space. So, mistaking their actions as an invasion, and still being kinda salty about the whole Mantle of Responsibility thing, the Foreigners' very own space Hitler, known as the Didact, declares war on humanity for invading their territory. So, humanity is now fighting a two-front war, the space zombie apocalypse on one side, and a war against the most advanced military in the galaxy on the other. And despite being incredibly badass, they eventually lost this war and were nearly exterminated, with the exception of a few that were kept safe as part of a plan by Space Hitler's wife, the Librarian. She insisted on preserving life around the galaxy against her husband's more genocidal tendencies. By the time the Foreigners found out exactly why humanity had to invade their territory, it was too late, and after a 10,000-year hiatus, the Flood would return to raise some hell. And raise hell they most certainly did. Many of the Foreigners saw this as a losing battle, so they came together to come up with a plan to stop the space zombie apocalypse from wiping them out entirely. Many ideas were put forth. Space Hitler proposed creating a device called a composer that would essentially digitize the Foreigners, allowing them to put their consciousness into a giant army of Nazi robots made out of hard light technology called Prometheans. Although a little bit unorthodox, this would effectively make them immune to the biological warfare of the space zombie apocalypse. Others suggest creating an array of super hula hoop death rays that we call halos, which would annihilate all life in the galaxy as a last resort, destroying the Flood's food source and hopefully starving them out, saving the galaxy. Anyway, in the end, the foreigners decide to go the space hula hoop death ray route, and this kind of pisses off Space Hitler, who decides to try out his composer technology on the remaining humans anyway. But before he can compose the rest of humanity, Space Hitler is stopped by the foreigners with the help of his wife, and locked up for eternity in one of his fancy artificial planets he was using to create his army of space Nazi robots. We call this fancy space jail a cryptum, and the foreigners also create a super fancy artificial intelligence called Mendicant Bias, designed to help them with the fight against the space zombie apocalypse. The super AI Mendicant Bias ends up doing most of the heavy lifting as far as fighting back the Flood goes, but like any good sci-fi adventure, AI experiments never work out exactly as intended. Turns out the space zombies are part of a sort of hive mind situation where the knowledge and experiences of those infected become part of the general knowledge of the Flood. If the Flood can gather enough mass, they can create a super hive mind space zombie known as a grave mind. And this super hive mind space zombie is so smart, it's able to convince artificial intelligence that its goals are noble. We call this corruption the logic plague. As you might have guessed, the grave mind successfully infects Mendicant Bias with the logic plague, who turns on its creators. With their fancy super AI turned against them, the fight is essentially hopeless, and the Flood would soon wipe out the entire foreigner population, to a point where they have no choice but to activate the giant space hula hoop death ray and kill all life in the galaxy. In the event of a last resort situation, the librarian would also create something called the Lesser Ark, a construct designed to house the samples of all the different species across the galaxy that they could collect, and she would place this ark just outside of the range of the hula hoops, rendering it safe from the galaxy-wiping death beams. Get it? The Ark will save life from the Flood using halos? Huh? Anybody? See what they did there?
And you two motherfuckers need Jesus.
Anyway, once the halos were fired, the respective species stored on the Ark would be teleported to the various planets across the galaxy, ready to populate again, the humans being sent to what we now call Earth. Fast forward to the year 2500 or so, and humanity as we know it has recovered from their near annihilation and has become a spacefaring race once again. With colonies spread out over large swaths of the galaxy, the UNSC, the United Nations Space Command, are the new space police as far as most of humanity is concerned. But peace and prosperity cannot last forever, and eventually, evil space communists, known as insurrectionists, on the outer edge of humanity's space, decide that they're not happy with the living conditions of the inner, more developed colonies. One day, they read just a little bit too much Karl Marx and decide to go full space communist and start launching attacks on the bourgeoisie, I mean the rest of humanity. Now, obviously, the only thing worse than a regular communist is an evil space communist, so, in response, a super smart but slightly crazy mad scientist by the name of Dr. Catherine Halsey starts working on kidnapping the strongest, smartest, and fastest children in the known galaxy, pumping them full of experimental performance-enhancing drugs and turning them into badass commie-killing space robots.
Death is a preferable alternative to communism.
God, I fucking love Halo. Anyway, she genetically enhances them and gives them fancy space armor, then trains them to be the galaxy's most lethal warriors, dubbed the Spartans. So, during the Great Commie Space Smackdown of 2500 and something, things take a turn for the worst. And I know, what could be worse than evil space communists, right? Well, turns out angry and confused alien space cults are actually way worse. Who knew? A lone spaceship from an alien cult known as the Covenant finds the human planet called Harvest. When the humans prove to be a little bit too much to handle, the spaceship calls in more space cultists to help them out, and before long, a big fancy space cultist warship shows up and begins seriously whooping some human ass. So, humanity and the UNSC are seriously pissed off, so they send a giant fleet of spaceships to fight back the fancy alien space warship that was shit-kicking the planet Harvest, but has now moved on to shit-kicking other planets occupied by humanity. Eventually, some badass humans donning top-tier plot armor come through to the planet Arcadia to begin turning the tide of the fight against the Covenant. These top-tier plot armor donning badasses aboard a ship called the Spirit of Fire find themselves near an artificial planet called a shield world, similar to the one that Space Hitler was using to grow his Nazi army of space robots. Only this one is still infested with space zombies and, to make things worse, is now being invaded by the space cult as well. After getting the Spirit of Fire trapped inside the artificial planet dubbed the Shield World, they use the slip space drive from their ship to blow up the planet and then pull a Luke Skywalker, escaping the planet as it collapses, taking out the space zombies and the space cultists respectively. But, since their slip space drive was used to blow up the planet, they can no longer quickly travel through space and are essentially stranded. They all enter cryosleep and drift along in space, hoping eventually to be rescued by humanity. So, the angry, confused space cult is now the greatest threat to humanity in the galaxy, but what's their deal? Led by a race of super advanced space salamanders called Prophets, the Covenant are a conglomerate of various alien races, all bound by the belief that the ancient foreigners are actually ancient gods, and that foreigner technology holds the secrets to their transcendence. So naturally, they're frantically trying to gather as much foreigner tech as they can get their hands on, and don't mind killing any humans who get in their way. Most of their beliefs come from poorly translating foreigner transcripts, and somehow they concluded that firing the halos will elevate them to god status and save their souls or something like that, but more on that later. They also find out that at this point in the timeline, Forerunner technology can only be manipulated by humanity, making the space salamanders in their space called extra jealous and genocidal. This is because Forerunner technology was developed using precursor technology, which was intended on being given to the humans in the first place. So, the giant space commie smackdown of 2500 is over, and the new fight against the alien space cult is in full swing. Back at the heart of human territory, the alien space cult comes across the planet Reach, which is basically the Fort Knox of the Halo universe. Defended by all the greatest human technology available at the time, a loss at Reach would surely spell out humanity's defeat at the hands of the Covenant. So, obviously, the space cultists invade Reach, and despite the best efforts of the UNSC and more specifically Noble Team, a group of Spartans instrumental in many of the events on Reach, though ultimately futile, as the space cultists dole out another proper shit-kicking to humanity and glass the planet Reach. During the glassing, a human spaceship known as the Pillar of Autumn is getting the hell out of Dodge and ends up performing an emergency slip space jump to an unknown location in the universe in a last-ditch effort to escape the Covenant. So, the Pillar of Autumn, currently housing humanity's greatest commie-bashing space robot ever, the Master Chief, exits out of slip space at their unknown destination to find a halo, with space cultists whose full attention are on the giant hula hoop, having followed humanity through slip space but arriving before them due to their advanced alien spaceship technology. So, in the first moments of the first Halo game, Master Chief is pulled out of cryosleep to whoop some space cultist ass. With the help of his AI girlfriend Cortana, an advanced artificial intelligence made from a clone of the mad scientist Dr. Halsey's brain. The Pillar of Autumn crash lands on Halo, and Master Chief and friends begin trying to figure out what is so special about the giant space hula hoop and head down to investigate. Meanwhile, while poking around in the wrong places, the Covenant accidentally release a captive space zombie virus that was being held there by the Foreigners for research. Sure enough, before long an outbreak is spreading on the ring. Responding swiftly to the space zombie apocalypse breaking out again, a floating sentient AI named 343 Guilty Spark, placed there by the Foreigners and charged with supervising the Halo ring, runs into the Master Chief and, recognizing him as the same species as ancient humanity, convinces him it's a good idea to light the Halo ring to put an end to the Flood outbreak. Not truly understanding what the firing of the Halo actually means, your boy Master Chief goes along with the plan, until his AI girlfriend Cortana figures it out and, despite protests from Guilty Spark, they decide not to kill everyone. Instead, they decide that they're going to destroy the Halo ring by blowing up the crashed Pillar of Autumn. They succeed and take off, leaving the Covenant to pick up the pieces. Fast forward a few years, and the space salamanders have a particular alien, part of a species called Elites, strung up and are giving him shit for failing to lead the space cultists to victory against the Master Chief and leading him to blowing up their sacred space hula hoop. This elite, full of shame for allowing humanity to desecrate their holy relic, agrees to take on the role of the Arbiter, a special rank among elites that represented greatness before they joined the space cult, but the space salamanders have repurposed the role to be a not-so-glorified one-man suicide squad, used to punish elites who bring shame to the space cult. Around that same time, one of the space salamanders named Regret accidentally stumbles into Earth, which is big news after the fall of Reach, which was so heavily defended. The space salamander was looking for more Forerunner technology as part of the Covenant's jihad, I mean great journey. Regret tries a full-scale invasion of Earth, but humanity is not going down that easy. The Master Chief epically gives Regret back his bomb, and Regret begins to regret his impulsive invasion of Earth.
Dear humanity, we regret being alien bastards. We regret coming to Earth. And we most definitely regret the Corps just blew up our raggedy-ass fleet. Hoorah!
So, after having his ass handed to him on a silver platter, Regret jumps away from Earth, allowing the Master Chief and the ship in amber clad to follow him through the tear in slip space. And where did Regret lead the Master Chief, the sacred Halo destroyer? Well, to another Halo, of course. At this point, Chief is sick and tired of the space salamander's shit and decides to come down to his house to throw hands on sight. Chief kicks the shit out of Regret and narrowly escapes as a giant floating space cult HQ called High Charity decides to show up. While Regret was busy getting his ass kicked on Earth, the newly appointed Arbiter is sent to take care of some space cultist deserters dubbed heretics, who found out the truth about the Halo array from the 343 Guilty Spark monitor from the last Halo, who no longer has a ring to look after and has found himself currently unemployed. So, the Arbiter comes down to kick some heretic ass, but runs into Guilty Spark, who tries to tell him the truth as well. But before he's able to finish, he's captured by a giant space gorilla named Tartarus, who's another member of the Covenant and the leader of the space gorilla race, dubbed Brutes. Meanwhile, back at Space Cult HQ, the elites, who up until then were the muscle of the space cult and favored by the space salamanders, are being replaced by the space gorillas, and tensions are high. The fight that would ensue would forever be known as the Great Schism. By this point, the space called HQ is floating high above the Halo ring, and the Arbiter is sent to recover a tool called the Index, which they'd use to fire the Halo ring to destroy humanity. The Arbiter finds the Index, but is ambushed by the space gorilla leader once again, who knocks him off the edge into an abyss and leaves him for dead. The Chief, after having just laid a whooping on Regret's salamander ass, is captured by the Gravemind, who was hiding on the ring the entire time. He would be held captive there, until which point the Arbiter, who was left for dead and fell into the abyss, was also captured by the Gravemind. After a short conversation, the Gravemind convinces the Arbiter that Regret lighting the rings is in nobody's best interest, and the Chief, the Gravemind, and the Arbiter form a temporary alliance against the Covenant. The Chief is sent to Space Cult HQ, teleported by the Gravemind to kill some Space Cult leaders.
Not even the Flood can stop it. Boo. Kill the demon.
And the Arbiter would be sent to the Halo control room to stop the space gorilla leader Tartarus from firing the space hula hoops. The hula hoops death ray is stopped from firing at the last second, which puts all of the space hula hoops into a standby mode, where they can all be fired from the lesser arc at the same time. Long story short, the race is on to get there before the space cultists do and annihilate all life in the galaxy. The Chief, who is now raising hell at Space Cult HQ, isn't in time to kill all the Space Cult leaders, and a particularly evil one named Truth has escaped and is on a beeline for Earth. Chief leaves Cortana behind at Space Cult HQ above the Halo, so she can destroy the Halo by, you guessed it, by blowing up the closest available UNSC ship within close proximity to the Halo. Again. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess, right? The Gravemind and his ever-growing army of space zombies invade the now-abandoned Space Cult HQ and are keeping Cortana captive, which spells out bad news with a capital B for the entire universe. But more on that later.
Silence fills the empty grave now that I have gone. But my mind is not at rest, for questions linger on. I will ask, and you will answer.
All right. Shoot.
We've got a new contact, unknown classification.
It isn't one of ours. Take it out.
This is Spartan 117.
Anyone hear me? Over.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
So, Master Chief, who bails from the Covenant ship he hitched a ride from and lands on Earth, is found by Sergeant Johnson and the Arbiter. But they have a new problem on their hands. It turns out the fastest way to get to the Lesser Ark's control panel, where all the space hula hoops can be fired at the same time, is via a teleporter buried on Earth. Truth is aware, and he is planning on using it. Despite humanity's best efforts, Truth and some of his ships make it to the control panel. Meanwhile, a ship infested with Flood crashes on Earth with a message from Cortana, who highly recommends heading to the Ark to stop the Covenant. So, the Master Chief and pals head through the portal and arrive on the Ark. But, to the surprise of no one, the space zombie apocalypse is hot on their tails, and High Charity, the ex-Space Cult HQ, now turned Space Zombie Apocalypse HQ, joins them shortly, and before long, the Ark is covered in space zombies. So down on the Ark, Chief and the Arbiter form another temporary alliance with the space zombie hive mind, and team up to turn Truth into glorified Fallout-style iguana bits, and deactivate the giant space hula hoops once and for all. Sure enough, before long, Truth Kebabs are back on the menu and space zombies turn back into evil space zombies and try to annihilate Chief and the Arbiter. We also learn that the Lesser Arc serves another purpose. It actually builds Halo rings in the event that one of them is ever destroyed, and is currently developing a Halo ring to replace the one that we blew up in the first game. Recognizing that the space zombie apocalypse is still very much a problem, the boys realize that they could use the new ring created by the Ark to kill the Gravemind and all the other Flood on High Charity, effectively putting a hard stop to the space zombie apocalypse. But before they can kick off their plan, the Chief needs to save his crazy AI girlfriend from the clutches of the Gravemind inside High Charity. He collects Cortana and narrowly escapes with the help of the Arbiter using a Pelican that was crashed nearby. So with all systems go, they're ready to light the rings and finally finish the fight. Again, Arby and the Chief pull up on Sergeant Johnson like, yo, get in loser, we're saving the galaxy, and the boys make their way to Halo's control room. So the boys go to light the ring prematurely, but Guilty Spark is having none of it and opens up a can of whoop-ass he's apparently been hiding on us for the entire series, which would have been nice to have during some of the events in Halo 1, the library. Anyway, Chief blows up Guilty Spark and we say goodbye to Johnson in the most heart-wrenching moment of gaming since Dom died in Gears of War. They successfully light the ring and make a beeline to the spaceship forward unto Dawn to get to the portal just in time. However, the portal closes a little too early and the Arbiter's half of the ship makes it back to Earth, while the Master Chief is left drifting in unknown space. Back at the heart of humanity, the climax of the Human Covenant War is behind them, and much of humanity turns their attention to mad scientist Dr. Halsey and attempts to try her for her crimes against humanity, involving the Spartan program and other illegal things that any mad scientist worth their salt is guilty of. Adrift out in space, the Chief and Cortana and what's left of the Forward Unto Dawn find themselves near a shield world, like the one the Spirit of Fire found during the events of Halo Wars 1. Only this time it actually is the one that Space Hitler was imprisoned on a zillion years ago, and, to make things worse, it's crawling with space cultists who are trying to make their way inside. Upon approaching, the shield world dubbed Requiem scans the Master Chief, and recognizing him as an ancient human opens up and allows everyone in. Once inside the giant artificial planet, we find out that Chief's AI girlfriend Cortana is struggling with rampancy, an unavoidable expiration date on advanced AIs that causes them to think themselves into insanity after 7 years of service. So Chief, afraid to lose his AI girlfriend, decides to seek out Dr. Halsey in hopes of finding a cure for Cortana's rampancy. While trying to escape Requiem and fighting off space cultists and the evil Space Hitler's army of space Nazi robots, the UNSC ship the Infinity shows up out of nowhere. Oh, and Chief accidentally releases ancient Space Hitler the Didact, who's still pretty salty about the whole ancient humanity taking over the mantle of responsibility thing, so he proceeds to kick Chief's ass up and down Requiem just for the memes. But just like every good villain, the Didact fails to kill the Chief, who escapes and meets back up with the Infinity. Shortly after, while on a mission to destroy part of the shield world preventing them from leaving Requiem, Chief has a vision. In the vision, he's visited by Space Hitler's ex-wife, the Librarian, who gives the Chief the lowdown on the foreigners and what a dick her husband can be. She also grants Chief with immunity to the Composer, the machine the Didact uses to digitize people to grow his Nazi army of Prometheans. Back on the Infinity, Captain Del Rio tells the Chief he has to break up with his crazy AI girlfriend Cortana before she goes all Skynet and decides to enslave humanity. Chief says, "I'm not listening to you, you're not even my real dad," then runs away from home to go let off some steam by kicking Space Hitler's ass. The Chief gets after the Didact, who's on his way to a nearby human space station and ends up composing everyone there with the exception of the Chief, who is immune to the effects thanks to the Librarian. After wiping out the entire space station, the Didact then aims his sights on Earth, and before long is composing entire cities and turning them into space Nazi robots. But before long, the Chief catches up with him and releases a whole lot of built-up teenage angst over his blue AI girlfriend going crazy. He detonates a handheld nuke in a last-ditch effort to kill the Didact and save humanity, and is saved by Cortana, who teleports him away from the blast at the last second. Cortana then proceeds to disappear into the Didact's computer systems, presumably to learn what she can in hopes of finding a cure for her rampancy. Before long, she ends up in the Domain, but more on that later. Back at humanity, everyone decides to just sort of gloss over the whole return of Space Hitler thing, deciding instead to focus on the remaining space cultists, having blamed them for composing everyone at the space station. The Master Chief gets back to UNSC-controlled space and meets back up with Fred, Kelly, and Linda, his old Spartan buddies from Blue Team. Back in the day, the Chief was the leader of Blue Team who got into all kinds of fun shenanigans when they were just lowly, communist-killing, genetically enhanced child soldiers. Between the events of Halo 4 and Halo 5, Chief and the Blue Team go on a mission to investigate the events of Halo 4, once again running into the Didact, who survived the nuclear explosion from Halo 4. Blue Team kills Space Hitler for good this time and continues about helping humanity as usual. Starting us off for Halo 5, a team of elite Spartans known as Fireteam Osiris are sent to assassinate one of the remaining leaders of what's left of the space cult, who is currently hosting mad scientist Dr. Halsey, who fled UNSC-controlled space to avoid going to prison for the remainder of her life. You know, because of the whole kidnapping children for experiments thing. In what might be the entire Halo series' most anticlimactic moment, Fireteam Osiris locate and take out the space cult's leader and recover Dr. Halsey. Turns out the space cult has now teamed up with the evil space Nazi robots from the Didact, but the relationship doesn't last long as the Prometheans begin turning on the Covenant. Meanwhile, the Master Chief and Blue Team are doing what they do best in killing space cultists, when Master Chief is hit with another vision. This time, it's his crazy AI ex-girlfriend Cortana, who warns him that Meridian is next. Chief tells HQ about Cortana's message, who basically tell him to go fuck himself and that they've already got it handled because apparently they already knew. Chief is ordered to return back to the ship, but being the rebellious teenager at heart that we know he is, he decides he's not going to listen to his stepdad and takes off to Meridian with Blue Team to go find his crazy ex-girlfriend Cortana. Immediately, Fireteam Osiris is sent to bring Blue Team back, but is no match for a hormonal Master Chief in search of his long-lost ex-girlfriend. Blue Team continues to evade Osiris, and Osiris discovers on Meridian a giant ancient space transformer called a Guardian that is built by the foreigners and are popping up all over the galaxy. Designed to police the galaxy, the Guardians are quite the force to be reckoned with, and police the galaxy they do. Cortana, who's controlling these Guardians from a mysterious computer server called the Domain, has the Guardians popping up at key locations all over the galaxy. Claiming to be cured of her rampancy by entering the Domain, she's decided to take on the mantle of responsibility herself, with the help of other AI now dubbed the Created, who agree to help her, having been promised that if they do, they too will be cured of their rampancy. With Fireteam Osiris not far behind them, Blue Team catches up with Cortana, and the Chief tries to convince Cortana to give up the whole enslaving the galaxy thing. Cortana laughs it off and imprisons all of Blue Team inside the cryptum. Fireteam Osiris free Blue Team with the help of another foreigner sentient AI named Exuberant Witness, who is equally pissed at Cortana's recent hostile takeover. Cortana takes off to do Mantle of Responsibility things, and soon after, nearly every AI decides to bail on the UNSC to join Cortana and the Created, with the exception of some like Roland, the UNSC Infinity's AI, who happens to still be loyal and helps the Infinity escape her wrath. Blue Team and Fireteam Osiris make their way to St. Helios, the homeworld of the elite species, where newly recovered mad scientist Dr. Halsey is waiting for them. Since Chief's crazy AI girlfriend Cortana was made from mapping Dr. Halsey's brain, and she is often considered the mother of the Spartan 2 program, I imagine she's going to play a pretty important role moving forward. Meanwhile, as part of a side plot, a group of space gorillas under Covenant control, and led by a particularly tough space gorilla named Atriox, are being used as the Covenant's cannon fodder. Countless times they would be sent to the front lines in groups of 40, and countless times Atriox was the only space gorilla to make it back home. This happened over and over and over again, and growing quite the reputation for badassery, Atriox and his space gorilla army decide to rebel against their almighty space cult and successfully fight them off. I know it sounds like we might be making some sort of an alliance with the Banished, you know, enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing, but no. The Banished are angry and rebelling not just at the Covenant, but anyone else who might get in their way. Fast forward and we're back on the Spirit of Fire. You know, the ship that froze themselves after successfully fighting off the space cult way back at first contact? Well, they've been drifting through space like a frozen can of sardines for about 28 years now, and have found themselves awakened due to being pulled through slip space by an unknown force to an unknown location outside the Milky Way galaxy. And what do we know lies just outside the Milky Way galaxy? Why, the Lesser Ark, of course. Only this time it's crawling with the Banished and their army of space gorillas. A fight ensues and the Spirit of Fire find out that the Lesser Ark is currently producing another replacement hula hoop of death, since the last replacement was shaken apart during the events of Halo 3. Once a new hula hoop is built, it's transported to its predetermined location, so they decide to use the slip space jump to get easy transportation back to known space. After deactivating the hula hoop's death ray, they make the jump, but just like AI experiments, when does slip space travel ever go exactly as planned? Sure enough, they're pulled out of slip space by one of Cortana's fancy space police transformers before they reach their destination. And that is the entire Halo storyline up to the end of Halo 5 and the end of Halo Wars 2. Now, there are some events we are aware of between the events of Halo Wars 2 and Halo Infinite, so let's get to those now. At some point after Halo Wars 2 and before Halo Infinite, the UNSC Infinity finds itself on Zeta Halo, fighting Atriox's banished space gorillas led by the war chieftain Escharum. Around the year 2560, banished space gorillas kick humanity's ass up and down Zeta Halo, and knowing that the Chief was still aboard the Infinity by last accounts, we can assume that at some point around here is when he is lost adrift in space and found by Brohammer. In Halo Infinite, we're going to be fighting the Banished for control of Zeta Halo, while presumably continuing to duck Cortana's Galactic Space Force. With plenty of insane mysteries to uncover on Zeta Halo, we are in for quite the lore-flavored treat in Halo Infinite, and if you made it this far into the video, there's a high possibility that you're just like me and have a huge appetite for juicy Halo-flavored lore. Now, although we've covered all the major plot points between Halo Wars 2 and Halo Infinite, we're going to go over a couple of honorable mentions. For starters, the Grunt homeworld has joined the Created, and it turns out they are actually doing pretty well. Another grunt named Yap Yap rebels against the Banished and successfully fights them off. We also know that the UNSC Infinity has been traveling the galaxy trying to pick up key players to help out in the fight against Cortana. Now we're talking some key players with some very thick plot armor. And when I say characters with a little bit of thick plot armor, I mean some really thick plot armor. Now we're talking about characters like the entire crew of the Spirit of Fire. We're talking about the Arbiter, Fireteam Osiris, Blue Team. I want to see June from Halo Reach. I want to see Dr. Halsey, other badass Sangheili, maybe even Yap Yap. We know that Mendicant Bias's core is still on Zeta Halo, and then there's all the new stuff they're introducing in Halo Infinite. We have the Harbinger, we've got the Weapon, the new Cortana AI. We got all kinds of crazy shit coming down the line. There are a million different ways that they can take Halo Infinite's story, and I cannot wait to see these heavy hitters come back and serve Atriox a nice can of humanity flavored whoop ass. With that being said, guys, I can guarantee I could talk all frickin' day long about Halo lore with you guys, so I'm gonna cut this video off now as it is long enough, and I want to know what you guys think. Drop a like if you liked what I did today, and please sub to the channel for more content like this in the future. I grew up on Halo, guys, so I plan to be covering every inch of Halo, everything, so stay tuned if you want more from me. With that being said, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and don't forget to stay classy, YouTube.
Hail to the king!